Hey guys, Thomas here with Aquarium Know-How, and in this video we're going to take this 85-gallon aquarium that I got on Craigslist. We're going to completely take it apart, remove all the silicone, clean up the glass, reseal it, remove the trim, and I'm going to turn it into a nice looking show tank. So stick around and we'll go through all the steps on how to do that. So this aquarium is the one I got on Craigslist a little while ago. Advertised as a 100-gallon aquarium. It turns out the measurements say it's an 85-gallon aquarium, and I was contemplating on what to do with it. The glass is in really good shape, no major scratches anywhere, but it is old, it's kind of ugly, and the silicone is starting to fail. I think it maybe had spent a winter outdoors. What happens in the winter when it gets cold, the silicone sort of shrinks, and then when it warms up it expands again. That can kind of break the seal on it. And you can see the silicone is kind of peeling up in some spots. You can see the corrosion. I'm not sure what that is, if that's calcium buildup or what that is, but you can see I can peel back the silicone pretty easily. And I haven't tested it to see if it'll hold water. It probably would, but I'm not going to risk 85 gallons of water spilling out onto my living room floor. Plus, it looks like it's been resealed once before, and it did kind of a sloppy job. It's not terrible, but I'd like to make it a little bit better. I'd also like to remove the trim, make it a nice looking rimless aquarium and not something that's got the ugly wood grain on it. So let's get started taking this apart. So we're going to start by removing the trim, and what you're going to need for that, you need a scraper, thin one, a box cutter, and plenty of razor blades. You might also want to get a razor blade holder. It's just a plastic piece that a razor blade clips into. Usually it uses the razor blades that aren't angled like this. They're more of a square. Either one will do. This will just probably hurt your hands a little bit more, and I can't find my handheld one, so we're just going to try to make do with this for now. Alright, so what we're going to do first is we're going to take our scraper, and we're basically going to stick it underneath this trim here and try to cut as much of the silicone that's up inside here as we can. I'm not sure how well this was resealed when it was resealed, but a lot of times the factory ones won't have a whole lot of silicone on the top, so it makes it a little bit easier. The corners are generally going to have more silicone, so those will be harder spots to get, but basically we just want to break as much of the silicone loose as we can, and we're going to gently try to pry up. This one feels a little bit loose and wiggly, so it might not be too hard. And just gonna keep going around and around, work the frame off a little bit by little bit, and we'll see how it goes. It's not uncommon to crack these. I'm not worried about breaking this, although for the video's sake, I'm gonna try to remove it without breaking it. But I don't know if it's been cracked before. The corners look like they've been cut possibly, so since this is a used aquarium, it might have already been modified a little bit. But as far as removing it goes and getting the silicone out, it should be the same if it's a brand new aquarium or a used one. So to get the trim off, I'm gonna need to remove this center brace. So that's gonna have to come off first, but that's gonna be pretty easy. I'm just gonna cut the silicone here and just slowly work it out, and then we'll start on the frame. So at first I'm just gonna remove as much of the silicone that's right on top and easy to get to. And that way I'll be able to see more of where the seam is and can get more precise and cut where the actual glass is silicone to the other part of the glass. It looks like the center brace goes underneath this trim or this frame a little bit, so I might have to get the trim off first. Okay, so we're just gonna work this up here. You'll feel when you hit the silicone, and you'll just kind of want to try to push it up a little bit and just kind of break that bond a little bit. You can try pulling it. You can hear the silicone in there. A lot of it's just by feel. You can feel there's a big glob of it right here that I keep getting stuck on. It's got a big seam of silicone underneath here too that I'll probably cut the razor blades. It's fairly loose on this side, starting to wiggle a little bit, but this inside silicone is holding it in pretty good. I can tell this has been resealed because normally you don't have silicone on the inside of the trim here. It's just going to be up at the top when they put the piece on. It'll be up at the very top. This is kind of unnecessary, so that's why it tells me that someone's resealed it and thought they went the extra mile to make sure it was extra sealed. So you probably won't have to worry about this if you're working with a store-bought tank. Yeah, so mine's not going to come off in one piece. It's actually four pieces. I don't know if it came like that. Looks like it might have been like that, but that's why there's the silicone on the inside. Your modern, newer tanks that have the traditional like black square trim, they're all going to be one piece. So this might be a little easier in the fact that I can take off one panel at a time. But if you're trying to save and reuse the trim, just be careful when prying on it. You don't put too much pressure on one point because they do crack pretty easily. As you can see, I've worked the silicone loose a little bit. I'm just going to kind of keep prying on it. And once you get it started, it usually starts to come off pretty easily. See, I haven't even cut down here yet. There's one piece. Yeah, you can see how the silicone was on the inside. Just a whole bunch of it. You can tell the silicone is really old and weak too, because of how easily it came off. Normally they're not quite that easy. So we'll work on the other sides. So just to show you a little bit closer what I'm doing, taking the razor blade, and on the inside I'm just running it up here and breaking the silicone on this seam on the inside. You can then take your scraper and work it up in there. This frame's a little bit different than most of your modern ones today. It doesn't have much lip that goes up under here, so I don't have to do that in this case, but usually you will have to come up this side. Once you work that a little bit, then you can come up on the other side, the outside of the glass, just start working it out. This has a lot of silicone on it too, more than you're gonna find. This, you can definitely tell someone's resealed this and used way too much. So I'm gonna work this out, peel this last bit of trim off, and then we'll get started on the bottom. You can see how much extra silicone's on here. You really only need to put it on the top. If you just put silicone on the top, when you put the frame back on, it'll squish out and kind of overlap a little bit. Main thing is just putting some in the corners. So that's the top trim off. Now we're going to work on the bottom. So make sure when you flip it over, you're flipping it over onto something soft. I'm using this rug. You just don't want that glass on a hard, like, concrete surface and get pressure points on it. You could crack it, and all this would be for naught. And you're going to use the same technique on the bottom. Generally the bottom is a little bit easier to get off. They don't usually use as much silicone on the bottom. We'll see how this one goes. So there we go, rimless aquarium. Now we're going to peel off as much of the excess silicone as we can, and then we'll work on separating the seams. Just wanted to show you this while I've got it here. So in here, see these bubbles? That's a good sign, and especially right here, actually on the seal, where the two pieces of glass meet and seal. That's a good sign that you need to reseal the aquarium. And be very careful with these edges. These aren't too bad, but they can be very sharp. I've flipped it up on its side from here using another rug. You don't want to be tipping this up on the concrete at all. So now what I'm going to do, now I've got it tipped up here, so I'm going to slowly rotate it around and drop it back down on here. So now the bottom will be back on the ground. So now what we're going to do is we're going to remove all the silicone in all of the seams. Now we're just going to get the silicone that sort of bridges this corner, not the actual silicone in the middle and between the two pieces of glass. We'll save that later. First we got to get off the actual seal here. All you're going to do is get your razor blade, start at the bottom, but just to show you because it's hard to get the camera down in there. All you're going to do is get the razor blade into the seam, make sure the razor blade's flat against the glass, then you're just going to run up this side, the other side here, and you'll run that up, and this should just peel right off. Now you'll do that in all four corners and along the bottom, same way I showed you here, and then we'll work on actually getting the seams and the pieces of glass separated. Alright, so we got all of the outer silicone off. Now we'll work on the seam. Now this one has a pretty decent sized gap in between two pieces of glass, so you might be able to get this razor blade in between there and go all the way down. What you don't want to do is, if you're running this down and angle it, maybe you could possibly crack it by doing that. So you want to kind of work it just in layers. Just cut a little bit at a time. And then once you get the first panel off, you can start to flex the two pieces of glass away from each other. And I'll show you when I get to that point. But then just kind of slice it little bit by little bit until you get all the way through the silicone. You can see how I'm slowly just kind of working it in. Once you start to separate it, you can also use your other hand. I can't show you with the camera, but use one hand to sort of pull the glass this way, and as you run the razor blade down here and pull the glass out, it'll sort of start to spread a little bit, and then you can get that razor blade deeper and deeper. So the first steps, the first pane of glass is basically just working it slowly, cutting little bit by little bit and working the glass and flexing it a little bit. Just be careful not to, you don't want to ream on it and crack it, but yeah, just keep working at it and you'll get there. So I got about halfway down through this side, and then as I was pulling it, I was noticing the more the razor blade cut through, or the lower it cut through, the more able I was to pull this glass, and it started to sort of separate on its own as I was pulling it. But I don't want to just rip it off because it's still attached down here. So that's about as far as I've gotten on this side. And it's starting to do the same over here as I cut down more and pull on this more. The silicone just starting to split and separate on its own. So what I want to do now is do what same thing I've been doing on the sides, and I want to start doing it on here because I don't want to pull this while it's still fully attached here. So I'm going to razor blade cut down the sides a little bit more and then work the bottom, and then as I get it loose where I can pry this out a little bit, it will expose the bottom. Okay, now you can see I've got most of the way through and I can actually pull this glass away now. But now we don't want to just rip it off because you could potentially get some friction point and crack the glass. So I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to razor blade cut this seam on the bottom, but as we pull this back, it's going to expose more of the silicone underneath, so we can slip the razor blade underneath it a little bit more as we pull back, and eventually we'll get it separated. Now this one's coming off pretty easily, so I'm going to go ahead and just bend it and pull it off because the silicone just completely falling apart. But if it's giving you any trouble, just keep running your razor blade on here and pulling it back further and further and further and cutting more. God, I can't really lift that off, so I'm just gonna cut it a little bit more. And there we go. First panel's off. Now we're just going to basically do the same thing. I go on the outside here, start working the razor blade in there and on the bottom. And as we start getting it separated, as you can pull these seams apart, you know, it exposes more of the silicone in here. So as you just keep spreading it, cut a little bit, spread it some more, cut it a little bit more, until eventually you'll get through, and then you can kind of just gently pry the glass pane off of the rest of the silicone. And just be careful. Always think about where the glass is going to fall. If it decides to let go, always make sure you got something to catch it or a hand on it. And so I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of the pieces off, and then we'll start cleaning up the glass and get ready to start putting it back together. Alright guys, so there you have it. Got all the pieces of glass separated. Be careful when you're setting them down on top of each other. You don't want to put the corner down and put pressure on there and lay it down. You could put too much pressure and crack it, so lay them down gently. Lay them down in a way where you can easily get under them and manipulate them without lifting and putting pressure on any of the edges. You don't want to chip the glass or crack it. And now all we have to do is clean up the edges. I'm going to use a razor blade, and we're just going to come in like so and get off all the excess. Just start at one edge and just peel as much of the silicone off as you can. Get it as clean as you can, and then after that you can take some isopropyl alcohol and a rag and make sure you get all the residue off of all the pieces. So I'm going to finish cleaning these off, scraping all the silicone off, using your alcohol and a rag, get all the residue off, and then in the next video we will start to assemble the aquarium. Don't forget to subscribe so you can see the next video where we start to put it all back together. Give me a like if you like this video, and comment if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.